Hey guys, Ariel over here at Fine F. Today I'm going to do a cooking video on making apple pie. This is a little bit before Thanksgiving, and so it's the time of year when I know a lot of people who don't normally cook end up pulling out their unused dishes to make or bake things for holiday special dinners with family and friends and that kind of thing. Not really something that my family ever did. Well, I mean, we cooked good food every day. My family just never celebrated holidays. But I know that's what most people do. So, I thought this would be a good time and this might be interesting to you folks. Now, if you watch my recent videos about my third anniversary thoughts and my big new exciting news, these apples actually came from my new property. Now, I picked them a couple months ago when I was there. Apples keep for a little while, but these wild apples don't keep all winter, so they're getting a little mealy. You can probably see that texture here in the apples. They don't taste very appetizing because of the texture if you're going to eat them as a fresh sliced apple at this point. But they are still perfect for making baked things. Actually, the more mealy textured apples often work out better in baked things. So that's what I'm using. I'm going to see if I can actually use up all the rest of these apples in making two pies, because I don't think they're going to keep a lot longer. So I've already washed these. They're organic apples because they're wild. They're off my own ground. And the first step to making an apple pie is you need a lot of apples. Now, you can buy grocery store apples, certainly, and if there's some on sale, if your grocery store is like mine, often they have too many and they'll have some that are getting soft or getting some bruises or some spots or something. Those are really good ones to buy if you need to buy some and you're wanting to make baked goods, because you're not going to notice any of that mealy texture, any of the bruising or soft spots or any of that, because you're going to cook them all to mush anyway. So that's a way to save a little money if you are going to buy your apples. And then I like leaving the peels on, kind of like with my apple crisp recipe I did. I, enjoy having the extra nutrients of the peels. If you don't like the texture, you can certainly peel them. This will take you a little longer if you do. But I am taking out the stems and the cores. You could use an apple core. I like a paring knife. It's just my way of doing it. It's something I've been doing by hand with a knife my whole life. Plus, when you live in a tiny house or a small space, or even I think it's a good idea in life in general, if you've got a tool that can do more than one thing, or a piece of furniture that can do more than one thing, or anything, that the more uses you can get out of one thing, the more efficient it is. And so that's one reason I like these little paring knives for almost everything in my kitchen, because I can do almost everything with them. And if I have a different appliance for each thing, like a apple core, really only cores apples, can't do anything else, and so on. So I like using tools like this that I can use for all kinds of things. Some of these apples are smaller. There's two different varieties here, but they are both wild. And like you can see, the skin's getting a little wrinkled. These varieties don't store that well, so I would not be able to keep them all winter long. And hence the pie today. Now, this pie is going to be gluten-free and dairy-free if those are dietary restrictions you're concerned about. If not, it just tastes awesome and you don't need to worry about it. But I had a couple people ask about that. I do mostly dairy-free. I'm not super strict about it, but I do eat a lot of butter. There is a lot of different proteins in dairy, in different parts of the dairy. If you have whole milk that's not been pasteurized and homogenized, it will naturally separate. If it sits anywhere for a little bit, you'll have a thick cream layer on top and a thin, what would be a skim milk underneath that. And there's different proteins in each of those different parts. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, I've never had my allergies or anything tested, but the milk part of that generally seems to irritate my digestion, and the fat part, the butter part, the cream part, does not seem to affect me really at all. So different people have different intolerances for different proteins in milk, and so the same might not be true of you, but for me, I don't seem to have a problem with butter, and I like butter, and it makes everything taste better, so I do use it. Now, I'm going to put butter in the topping on this, but if you want to go really completely dairy-free, you could certainly use coconut oil or something like that as well. That would be just fine. And if you guys are getting butter, I would look for, if you can swing it with your budget, try to find a butter that's made from grass-fed cows. If you've got people who have, if you've got your own, or if you've got people in your area who have dairy animals, then you can probably source this. If not, there's a brand called Kerrygold that's available at most grocery stores, but it's the actual nutrient quality in the butter is much higher. You'll notice it if you buy Kerrygold or some other grass-fed butter and put it beside your regular, store brand butter. You'll see a big, very noticeable difference in the colors. The grass-fed stuff is going to be a much deeper, richer yellow. And what I'm told is if you, actually do a test on what nutrients are in there, some of these apples get a little challenging when they're real small and getting a little soft. But you can do your own research about that, but from my understanding, butter from a grass-fed animal, it's got, for one, a lot of vitamin K in it. That is one of those vitamins that's hard to get from most sources, and grass-fed dairy is one of the better sources for that. And it tastes better. If you buy, just your regular average pale yellow butter and then you make your own or buy a Kerrygold or something along those lines, you'll notice a difference in the taste. I mean, butter tastes good. It's hard to have bad tasting butter, but I definitely prefer the taste of the grass-fed stuff. And on that note, if you, again, I'm not a doctor, do your own research, but I highly recommend using real butter of any kind over artificial fats like margarine. The chemical structure there is something that your body doesn't actually recognize as food and can't break down and can't use. So that's long-term not going to be helpful to your health. And eating fat does not make you fat. Your body burns fat. That's natural, good fats, real fats. Things like butter and olive oil and coconut oil are really good for you. It's actually what your brain needs to run on. So that's the high test fuel for your brain. So make sure you're getting some good real fats in your diet. And it can improve the nutrient absorption of a lot of the other things you eat. So that's why I use real butter, and I don't recommend margarine or any kind of artificial fats. Now as I'm going here, I just find it more efficient personally to do all the halving and coring as my one step. I'm not actually making my pie with whole apple halves here, even the small ones. So I'm just going to make a pile here, and then I'm going to slice them in a minute. But this apple pie is gluten-free because of a secret. I didn't put a pie crust in it. I've tried various crust recipes that don't use wheat flour, and they're not the same. The thing about a pie crust that makes it good, at least in my mind, is this, nice flaky texture that you get when you have little bits of butter in between layers of the glutinous flour, and the way it melts that texture and taste is just amazing. Now, the only reason it gets that texture is because of that gluten in the wheat. And like I said, I've tried multiple other kinds of flours, and while I use lots of other flours like coconut flour and rice flour and so on for a lot of things and have no problem at all substituting them, pie crust is just not one of them I've found. I have seen some recipes out there that people say are really good as substitutions, but they generally seem to require having a ton of different things that you may or may not have in your kitchen. So instead of just flour and water and salt and butter, which is a basic pie crust recipe, you have your water, salt, and butter, and then like 6 different kinds of a little bit of this flour and a little bit of that flour and a little bit of this starch and so on. And so it's just complicated and kind of a pain, and I decided the simplest way to have a pie crust without the wheat in it was to not put a crust on it. I like eating plain pie dough, to be honest, when I am making crust, but I don't really love the crust in a pie myself. What I like about most pies is fruit. I do a lot of fruit pies, and I really like the fruit, so I don't miss having the crust at all. You could do this exact same pie recipe with a regular crust. You could do it with wheat. You could make your own. You could buy a crust from a grocery store. You could do a graham cracker crust if you wanted. You could do any of that stuff. But my pie, I simply don't put a crust in. And I don't miss it. And nobody I've ever served it to has missed it. Every time I make these, I have somebody over for dinner, and the pies seem to just... Uh-oh. There's an apple in the wood stove. Pies seem to just disappear. And again, back to the nutrition thing, I don't know, I've never done any testing. My dietary allergies are self-diagnosed. They're just me going on, trying different things, and I know whether or not I feel better when I do or don't eat something. And I don't know that I really have a problem with wheat necessarily. I have a suspicion that I probably have more of a problem digesting something about the wheat, the way wheat is produced commercially normally these days, like being soaked in Roundup. If you guys don't know much about commercial food production, when you've got a whole field, usually things don't all ripen naturally quite at the exact same time. But if you are going to harvest them all at the same time with a big combine, you do need them to all be ready at the same time. So usually what is done now, sadly, is when a field is almost ready and some of the plants are ready to harvest, the entire field is sprayed with Roundup to kill everything. And it seems that some of those chemicals are soaked up into the seed heads as the plant is dying, and therefore ending up in your food. So I don't know if I have any problem with wheat. If I grew my own out in my garden, I suspect maybe my problem's actually with some of the things like Roundup and so on, but I don't know. I just know I generally feel better when I don't eat it. So hence my pie crustless pies. Now the next thing to know if you're going to make an apple pie, and several other kinds of fruit pies, but apples do this a little more than just about any other kind of fruit, is if you want your pie to end up being, kind of level full with your pie pan or just below it, you're going to have to start out a lot higher than that. This I've seen happen quite a few times. Somebody wants to make an apple pie and they've never done this before, so they're going to fill it right up to there. They put it in the oven to bake. As it bakes, moisture soaks out and evaporates out of the apple slices. They mush together, they kind of compact, they shrink, and you pull it out of the oven, and instead of having a nice full pie pan, you have a little tiny bit of pie with your crust and topping. So I actually pile for apples, again, they shrink a little more than most other fruits, so I wouldn't necessarily do it quite this high with a peach or something like that, but for an apple pie, I am going to pile this dish just mounded as high as I can get it to do without falling over the sides. And these pie plates are a little bigger than your average size. I don't remember where I got them, but I have some of the smaller ones. I just like these because I can put more fruit in them at the same time. So I'm going to keep slicing away here on apples until I've got both of these mounded up really high. And again, if you want a pie crust, there's no reason you couldn't do this exact same recipe with a, regular crust or any kind of crust you wanted. As I said, I'm using wild apples off my own ground, so they are really small. If you were using a regular bigger apple that you bought from an orchard or a grocery store, you would probably need, depends a little bit still on the size of your apples, but you'd probably need like 6 to 8 apples maybe per pie pan to fill it up really full. You wouldn't need the dozens that I am using. But these are the apples I have, and so there's going to be dozens in here. But like most things with cooking, there's a lot of substitutions you can make, and most things turn out really good anyway. I rarely make 2 recipes exactly the same, which is one of the more challenging things with making cooking videos for people. Now, I'm not going to start out with that pan too full. Actually, that's probably even a little bit fuller than I want. I'm going to add more, like I said, and pile it up, but I want room to mix something else in here first, and I don't want to have to do extra dishes. So I'm going to slice up these last few, and then I'm going to mix a couple surprise ingredients in with my apples. The root of this recipe originally came from a friend of mine, Dee Dee, who used to run a bed and breakfast. I knew her when I was a child, and she also then cooked at a pretty big restaurant for quite a while. She's a fabulous cook, and this is kind of a Dee Dee's apple pie recipe that has a few of Ariel's modifications. Dee Dee certainly did a traditional pie crust in hers, and she was an awesome cook and baker. So before I get any further here, I'm actually going to just level out my 2 pie pans here. Something like that. Apples are a little bit sticky. And now, because this is the easy time to mix it in, a lot like my apple crisp recipe, I like the flavor of cranberries along with the apples. It's pretty, the color is pretty, I like the little bit of extra tart flavor of the cranberries, and it gives you a little extra variety in your nutrition. So I'm going to mix some cranberries into there. Now, there is no reason you couldn't just do one single pie at a time. I'm just doing 2 because it doesn't take much longer than doing 1. And I'm trying to use up my apples before they go bad. If you're going to pour spices directly like I do, if you're pouring like this, which I've done, and the spice decides to not cooperate, you can accidentally get your entire pint of cinnamon or whatever it is in your pie all at once, and that's kind of a pain. What I usually do when I'm pouring spices like this is kind of shake them into the lid, so I've got a backstop there in case I get way too much, and I don't end up with a whole jar in my pie plate. That is cinnamon, which of course goes great with apples. Cinnamon's also good for your circulation, and it smells and tastes amazing. Now, the other thing I'm putting in the apple pie is pecans. You could do walnuts, pecans, that's the 2 I've used. I prefer the pecan flavor myself over walnuts, but either one works really well. And if you've got a nut allergy, you can simply skip the nuts. That's no big deal either. I don't always put it in. The pies are going to taste just fine either way. So we've got some cinnamon, some nuts of some kind, my cranberries, and apples in there. As I said, I'm going to make these fuller, but I want to mix these things up. Now, I like to put a little bit of sugar in here. The apples are probably sweet enough by themselves, no question, but the sugar does help a little bit to draw out some of the juices in the apple, and it is dessert, and I like sweets much more than I should. You could make this recipe with no sugar at all, and you'd be better off than I am. Now, that's a raw, unrefined sugar. That's why I kind of like my salts. It looks dirty. Most refining processes for most food are just not that good for you. So, whenever possible, with every ingredient, I try to buy the most natural version I can. Now, I'm going to just gently mix this up a little bit so that cinnamon and sugar kind of coats my apples. Cinnamon really sticks to them. It smells amazing. This is another one of those times it's too bad videos don't give you the scent of things. I'm going to mix this in just so I know I've got my ingredients kind of throughout my pie. There we go. Rinse the cinnamon off my fingers. And going to stack it up the rest of the way with apples. Okay guys, had a quick technical difficulty there. I ran out of camera battery. So while I had a battery charging, I finished having and coring all my apples. So now I just have to stack them all on top of my pies. The other thing I forgot earlier, along with why I don't like having an apple corer personally, because it's only good for a single use instead of being versatile like a paring knife. Check out the size of these tiny little wild apples I'm using. If I had my good for only one thing apple corer, it is sized for your regular commercially grown apple, and would do me no good for this size because it couldn't even do anything with that size of apple. So just another thing to think about. You can obviously do whatever you like, but I like to use things that are good for more than one use. And if you guys are not trying to use up a million tiny little apples, I also promise this will go an awful lot quicker if you're only slicing bigger ones. That certainly is more efficient. But I have these, and they're free, and they're wild and natural and organic and all that good stuff, so that's what I'm using, even though it's certainly taking me a little extra time to slice them up. Oh, and I forgot to figure out what the proportions were when I dumped the other ingredients in there, because I'm really bad at that, but I would say I put a good tablespoon at least of cinnamon in per pie. Again, of course, you only need to, do one if you want, but about a tablespoon of cinnamon per pie, and probably about a quarter cup of nuts. Like I said, that's totally optional. You don't have to do any nuts, or you can do pecans, which I did, or walnuts, and probably a good cup of cranberries. If you don't have fresh cranberries, and I do try to buy some extra ones when you can get them around Thanksgiving and the holidays, because the rest of the time in grocery stores, at least in this area, don't seem to carry fresh cranberries. You can buy canned cranberries, and I don't like them quite as well as the fresh ones. But I do try to buy extra fresh and put some in the freezer so that I will have them throughout the year when I want to make apple things with cranberries in them. And then the other question I get is, what am I going to do with 2 whole apple pies, because I'm a single person, it's just me here. Well, that's true, but I also cook for a lot of other people. You might have noticed, if you've looked at my other tiny house stuff, that I pretty often mention that I've got some amazing neighbors, like somebody who plows my lane. I do shovel everything around the house, but who plows the lane out to the paved road for me when it snows in the winter, and so on. And what I do in exchange for a lot of those things is make food for people. Because in my experience, a lot of, especially men living on their own, are very appreciative of home-cooked meals. So I'm not going to eat both whole pies by myself. In fact, I probably won't even eat most of both pies, but I promise they will both be used up in very short order. They're not going to be sitting around here being left over. Okay, so I've kind of got these piled up a little bit. Believe it or not, I actually usually stack these higher, but that is all of my apples, and that's what I was trying to do, is use up my extra apples here. So if you don't mind making extra dish dirty, and this actually isn't too bad because I'm going to reuse this for making my topping, you could, don't spill it on the floor, mix your cinnamon and nuts and apples and everything in a bowl like this. I do like to slice them directly into the pie pan, though, whatever pan you're going to use, because that lets you see exactly how full you're making it, and because that's a little hard to tell any other way, really, because there's such a variation in sizes of different apples. That's just the easiest way I find to measure for whatever size of pie plate you've got. So you can mix that all up, gets the cinnamon a little more all over everything, and then carefully pile them all back into your pie pan. This involves a little bit of Tetris to stack everything in when you want it to stack up really high. And again, you want to do this because otherwise, as the apples bake and shrink, you will end up with a hole in the middle of your pie. And piled up like that, or even a little bit higher, it will actually end up giving me a level pie when that comes out of the oven. Mix this guy up a little bit better too. The smell's just amazing. That sugar kind of draws out the apple scent, and you can smell the cinnamon. It's just a real nice holiday dish. And I make this any time of the year that I happen to have apples, but especially in the fall because that's when apples are in season, or around the holidays because I know that's when a lot of you guys do a lot of your baking and such that you probably don't do the rest of the year. It's a real good holiday smelling kind of dish. And it's really pretty. I like the cranberry little bright red spots in there. They look kind of like little jewels in the pie, I think. Do my Tetrising here to make it all fit. There we go. There's my cinnamon off my fingers again. And now I do put a topping on here. I actually remembered to pull my butter out of the fridge earlier so it would be soft. So I'm going to dump that in here. Again, I'm not very good at proportions, but I am doing 2 pies here, and I'm doing a half a cup of butter. So if you were just doing 1 pie, I would use about 1/4 cup. So I've got softened butter. Gonna do oats. You could use rolled oats or quick oats. I kind of like the quick oats because they give you a little bit more of a chewy texture instead of, because they're broken up a little smaller, so they're not quite as crunchy as the rolled oats. But some people prefer that. I just like the more chewy texture because everything soaks into them a little better. So let's pretend that I did something like 1.5 cups of oats. Actually, that looks a hair shy. We're going to say that's more like a full 1.5 cups. So that'd be about 3/4 cup per pie. Gonna do some more cinnamon in here. Again, I'm going to do my little pouring in the lid trick, but let's say a good 2 tablespoons. It's hard to get too much cinnamon with most things, especially apples. So oats, cinnamon. I do like some kind of flour in here. You can certainly make a more crumbly topping without it. And again, you could do wheat flour or anything, but for a crumbly thing that's not a pie crust, just about any kind of flour will work. That'll teach me not to forget to charge my camera batteries. Died on me again. I just put flour in, just like I said, just about any kind of flour will work with something that's crumbly where you're not trying to have a pie crust pastry-ish texture. And then I'm going to add a little bit of brown sugar. Again, I don't recommend a whole lot of sugar. I like sugar more than I should. I don't think it's that great for your health. You could do this with no sugar at all in the topping. It would taste just fine. The apples are sweet. I just like the flavor of brown sugar. And back on the theme of that you can substitute lots of things. You don't have to have a special trip to the grocery store for most kinds of recipes. If you don't have brown sugar, but you want the brown sugar-like texture, you can use white sugar and molasses, because white sugar is just really refined sugar, and molasses is the crud that's left in the bottom of a tank or whatever they were using to refine sugar these days after you take out the white sugar. It's all the minerals and vitamins and everything that was in the sugar cane or sugar beets or whatever you're making your sugar out of. So you could mix white sugar and some molasses and make brown sugar if you don't have it. So I'm just going to mix that up. It's going to be really crumbly. That's just fine. And I'm going to get my hands in here. Sugar out of my way. And just kind of work it just a little bit with my hands, work the butter lumps the rest of the way in. It's going to be a little bit crumbly. If you look on the See More tab below the video here when I'm done, I will try to make up proportions per pie for approximately what I did here. But like most things, none of this is real specific. You could do kind of whatever you want. Then this is the really tricky part. If you like games that require balance and stuff, this is the good part. To stack your crust or your crumb topping on top of your giant apple mound. So I find it usually works best to kind of make a little wall out of my hands and use it to catch what's going to roll off the edge, and kind of pack the rest down just a little bit so it stays put. Now again, I promise you guys, when these come out of the oven, they are all going to be shrunk down, and it's just going to be a normal looking level pie plate full, not this giant mound that you can see right now. But right now it probably looks kind of funny. So just gonna sprinkle the rest of this on, and then I'm gonna bake them for about an hour at 350, 325, something like that. When the hour is up, what I'm actually going to do is just turn the oven off and let them sit in there. I'm not going to pull them out. And there. I'm just going to, an hour later, turn the oven off and let them just stay in the heat. That kind of helps the apples, the pectin in there that makes it nice and thick and tasty to all set up. So just let them kind of cool down slowly in the oven for a little while, because probably when I turn the oven off in an hour, this is still getting mounded up just a tiny bit, and as it sits there and kind of settles, it's going to go down to being level. So you wouldn't have to do that. You could pull it straight out, but I'm going to. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of foil on top of these, kind of like I think I had mentioned when I did the apple crisp recipe. Due to my really dry climate, I have a hard time sometimes cooking things soft that I was used to having no problem at all with when I lived somewhere more humid, because the moisture evaporates so quickly that the whatever it is, in this case apples, kind of can't cook in its own juice because it's evaporating. So I'm going to leave, again, if you're using foil, the shiny side goes toward the food so it doesn't stick. The matte side, the not shiny side, is one that goes up because it'll absorb more heat instead of reflect it. So I'm not putting those tight, but I'm just kind of putting it over there to help trap more of the moisture in so that the apples can cook soft. And I'm probably going to leave that on there for about the first 45 minutes. I'm going to set the timer for 45 minutes. Then I'll just grab an edge of the foil with my pot holder, pull the foil off, leave it in there for the next 15 minutes, turn the oven off, let it sit till it doesn't have to be cold by any means, but cooled down a little bit, and then I'll have some apple pie for dinner. So I'll show you guys that when it's done. Here you go, guys. The finished apple pie. As I said, I had it in the oven for about 45-50 minutes while it was covered with foil. Then took the foil off so the top could brown. That was on there long enough to keep some of the moisture in so the apples could cook soft, and baked it for about another 15 minutes, and then just turned the oven off and let the whole thing sit in there. So as the oven and the pie kind of cooled down, everything settled down, and you can see how full it is now. Remember how big that pile of apples was when we started? So there's finished apple pie. It's delicious, and I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks for watching, folks. If you're interested in more info on my off-grid tiny house life, check out some of my other videos here. And if you like what you're seeing, click the little picture of my house to subscribe, and then hit the little bell so YouTube actually notifies you every time there's a new video available. See y'all next time.